Now that we have an idea of what the player will eventually look like and be able to do, let's begin building it. We're going to start with the foundation, and in this instance that foundation is going to be the boy model. I'm going to go to the models folder, the characters subfolder, and I'm going to locate the boy model. I'm going to click and drag that into the scene. Just to keep things nice and neat, I'm going to go ahead and put the model at the origin by clicking the cog or gear icon in the upper right hand corner of the transform component and selecting Reset. Now that I have the model in place, I'm going to start setting up its various components for animation and physics. We can see that because it's a model, it already has an animator component on it, and it already has an avatar applied to the avatar property on that animator component. What we need now is to add a controller. You should have already created the animator controller for the boy in a previous chapter. I'm going to go ahead and open the animations folder and locate the boy animator controller. I'm then going to click and drag that onto the controller property of the animator component in the inspector. Now, without doing anything else, we can hit play and we should see the boy animated. Now that that's done, I'm going to add two components that are going to allow for my physical interactions. The first is going to be a rigid body. I'm going to add that by clicking Add Component, Physics, Rigid Body. The default rigid body would work well, but there are some things we're going to change to get the feel exactly how we want it. First off, we don't really want the player to have a feel of inertia. Instead, we'd prefer the player to stop immediately when we stopped pressing any inputs. The same goes for turning. So we're going to adjust the drag and the angular drag properties. We could choose really high number, but instead, we're going to actually choose the value infinity. This way, the player will stop immediately, both with movement and turning, when we're not using any of our inputs. We'll continue to use gravity, which will ensure that the player is always firmly planted on the ground. However, while we want the player to move along the y-axis so that it can turn left and right, we don't want it to be able to rotate on the x or the z axes, so we're going to freeze those constraints. Now that we have our rigid body, which is going to allow us to move our player around and also to receive forces, we need to add some physicality. If I were to hit play right now, we could see that I'd be able to go to my scene view and actually move the player into another solid object. This signifies that it has no physicality. Instead, we want to define a perimeter to the player so that the player cannot exist inside other solid objects. For this character, we're going to add a capsule collider. I'm going to add a capsule collider to the player by clicking Add Component, Physics, Capsule Collider. It's worth noting that I could create a very specific, very targeted collider on this character. However, the capsule collider is going to do a pretty good job. Furthermore, it's just generic enough that if we were to swap the models of this character for a different character, say the girl model, which we're going to use as an alternative version of the player, it'll still work and fit well enough. I will see though that when I first add the capsule collider, it doesn't quite fit very well at all. I'll need to move this so it fits around the player a little bit better. I'm going to adjust the center X, Y, and Z values so that the center of the capsule collider is in the center of the model. And then I'm going to adjust the height so that it fully covers the model. There, that looks pretty good. If I want to check it, I can always orbit around it to make sure it looks alright. I now have the basis for my player controller, which I'm just going to call the player. In the upcoming sections, we're going to add the scripts to the player, which is going to allow us to move around and have our interactive behaviors.